Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two and figuring out just what is going on is a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we're discussing Suddenly a Murder by Lauren Muñoz, reading up to but not including chapter 22. And this book, I feel like I thought was a murder mystery. We'll have to talk about whether or not that's really what it is, but it does have some fun, some of those fun clue vibes we talked about, I feel.
I think it is definitely the vibes we needed after some of the other things we read. Like, it involves a murder, obviously, but it does have, like, the silly, goofy vibes, which is strange to say, but...
I was nervous about the silly, goofy vibes because of the main character being, like, this character who's maybe feeling a bit outcasted, or maybe not even the right word, but just different from her peers since she's going to this, like, you know, sort of hoity-toity private school. But I feel like it hasn't ended up too heavy yet. I'm just a little concerned about when we get to the end if it's going to feel really heavy.
Yeah, depending on how this book ends could be interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was a bold opening for the book, too, to kind of start with the murder scene and it be, like, the main character, at least, you know, allegedly the murder scene. But yeah, like, have her point of view be the one that we're actually going to follow through the book, too.
Right, I definitely thought that was going to be a red herring. I think this book sets up a couple of those just because it's in first person, right? So we don't actually know it's Izzy in that moment. But because of, like, what she does later, going into Blaine's room with the knife and, like, that does happen. So I think we can say she kills Blaine. I would be surprised if, while we don't see the actual stabbing take place, it would be surprising if she went into the bathroom with the knife, left, and then somebody else killed him in the same way. So I think it's safe to assume she actually did do it. But I guess anything is possible.
Yeah, I'm not going to commit myself to a theory on this, but there is room for a theory where, like, they come back the next day for, you know, day 2 of interviewing or whatever, and are like, so, like, I don't think toxicology happens this fast, so I think this is going to happen, but, like, hey, we got a toxicology report that said there was poison in his system, and it's like, oh, shoot, someone murdered him, but someone else also tried to murder him, you know, something like that.
Oh, interesting. That actually... Chloe has some, like, a red vial of something,
that's right? Man, maybe I did jump the gun on that then. Because I didn't really think that would happen, but there's room for it, for sure. For sure, yeah. That would be interesting. Well, maybe we should just get into it before we get even further carried away.
Yeah, this book has a lot you could do with theories, so it's probably mostly going to be a lot of that. But to set the scene... Kassidy, who is Izzy's best friend, has basically planned a trip to Ashwood Manor, which is the setting of, like, their favorite movie, and also is basically a museum at this point, but rich people can do whatever they would like. So they get to go and experience this kind of immersive 1920s experience. No cell phones, fancy clothes, tennis in the afternoons, you know.
I was dead at the tennis. Yeah. I was dead at the tennis outfits more so, I should say.
Mm-hmm. And then this wouldn't be a murder mystery if there also weren't some hidden passageways in the house, which I'm living for. I love that shit.
Well, it's funny that this comes up because it led to a question. In the most recent book we read, there was a pretty significant plot point given away by eavesdropping. And I feel like you didn't particularly like that when you were talking about it. But then this book is, like, a lot of eavesdropping to learn things. Though I will say, like, it's more information as opposed to crucial plot point. But I was just curious how you feel about that.
That is a good point. I think almost incidental eavesdropping is kind of what's more annoying. In the previous book, Jane kind of just happens to be there and she happens to get the information she needs.
Right. It's unearned, I guess.
Yes. In this, Izzy is like, I'm going to eavesdrop on these interviews. Like, the information being given is also very intentional, right? It makes sense within the plot going on. It's not accidental. It doesn't, I guess, except for the Chloe fight is kind of an accidental one.
Right.
But that would be the only, I think, similar instance. But it's...
I do feel like there's a major difference in that in the last book it was kind of like, here's me telling you the plot development, whereas this you're actually seeing some sort of activity, right? It's not just like someone talking about, oh, Chloe and Blaine had a fight, like how, you know, weird that is, as opposed to like what actually happened is she got to hear the fight between Chloe and Blaine. There was a plot point that she was able to make her own assumptions about or connections with.
Right. And it also wasn't a one-off thing, right? It's not like she just heard this fight and that's the only time she used the passages. The passages are important, right? And the eavesdropping becomes very important. So I think the follow-through, it makes sense. If it was just the one scene where she picked up the Blaine and Chloe fight and then that was like the only eavesdropping that happened, it would be kind of annoying. Like it would feel unnecessary.
Right.
Because we already know Blaine and Chloe are together. I guess the point is that Izzy has to know they're together, but she could also come to that conclusion, I think, quite easily without the fight scene. But because it happens, I think, with intention later, with the interviews, and it becomes a sort of, not like an accidental thing, but an intentional device throughout the book. It just rings a little differently.
Mm-hmm. So should we start talking about some of these dramas that these characters have, and we can kind of introduce them as they come in?
Yeah, it wouldn't be high school, I guess. Rich high school in particular.
Oh boy.
If there wasn't a lot of bullshit going on.
Yeah, we got the hint with the Chloe and Blaine fight, but I wanted to step back to the Ferguson and Ellison parts. So maybe we can start off just sort of explaining who these characters are a bit and then connecting why there's a problem here. Fergus is the aforementioned theater gay, and he's got a particular interest in Ellison. He's also best friends with Blaine, well, at least historically best friends with Blaine. And there was some sort of secret, unmentioned hookup or, I don't know, fling between Ellison and Fergus that Ellison does not want people to know about. And I kind of just assume this is because of, like, stupid high school hierarchy stuff.
And then also Fergus does seem like, he describes it as, well, Blaine is being a jerk to him, but also he can't make new friends at this point. Like, it's too late. So he obviously doesn't fit in anywhere else. And he obviously has a reputation as well. When he goes to visit Ellison, other members of the crew team are quick to make fun of him and, like, just be gross in general. So
yeah, I also feel like, so Fergus has this whole thing of feeling like an outsider. I mean, with Blaine and then just like the larger friend group, he feels kind of left out. But I did notice he shot himself in the foot when it came to the whole regatta thing. And he was like, oh, like, I don't, I'd rather get my wisdom teeth pulled than go to a regatta. And then they were like, cool, so we're not going to invite you. And then he was like, no one invited me when he realized that he had a chance to see Ellison if he went.
He was definitely dramatic. He was like, the first time was on me, but them not inviting me again, it's because they hate me. And I'm like, sir, please.
Like, if he had said that to me, I would be like, oh, no, he's just not interested. I'm not going to ask.
Right. Well, I kind of understand. Like, obviously, it is the drama of it all, but sometimes you just like to be asked, even if you're going to say no.
Yeah.
But the other perspective is you don't want to keep asking somebody and they keep saying no. I would rather die than do this thing.
Yeah.
Because that's basically what he said, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah.
I understand from both perspectives, but he is dramatic.
Yeah, I think he isn't without fault on that, I guess is all I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. It does show how close he is with everybody else in that group, though. Like, obviously, Kassidy, he very much sees as Blaine's girlfriend. Like, I don't think they're actually friends.
Mm.
And then when it comes to Izzy, he does, I think, make a comment saying, or like calling her the therapist friend. Or maybe she refers to herself that way, but that is kind of the role she's taken. There's a line, right? But if you see Izzy only as the therapist friend, then you're probably not actually that close.
It did feel a little distant, right? Like, it almost did feel like she was therapist friending him by being like, oh, like, why don't you play me that song? Like, it didn't really feel like a genuine connection. It kind of just felt like I've learned what sort of things I should say to Fergus when he's sad. Yeah,
for sure. And I think that speaks probably more on, I mean, all of their relationships are so nothing. Like, none of the connections feel very genuine, except for maybe Izzy and Kassidy.
Yeah,
but it also speaks to Izzy. She is with all of these rich kids, obviously does not fit in. And her mom makes the most interesting comment of, like, don't ruin the relationship you have with Kassidy.
Yeah.
Especially not over a boy, but, like, don't do that because you need people like Kassidy.
Right.
And that's not speaking in friendship terms. I'm pretty sure she meant that in the Kassidy's rich and will literally help you in life way.
Right.
But then that also places a kind of strain on their relationship because now you're just using her position and her money which, like, eat the rich, obviously, but it kind of makes all the relationships in this book very distant, right?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts about the Izzy and Kassidy relationship that I'll maybe add in when we get into more of their connection later on. But I agree with you that it's the most genuine relationship, but there's definitely still some stuff there.
For sure, yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention about the Fergus and Ellison thing is just like how Ellison responds to Fergus in both kind of a situation where Fergus was vulnerable and a situation where Fergus was aggressive, because the response was almost the same. But interestingly, when Fergus went into the locker room and was like really like out of his league on what he was, trying to do, and having a conversation with Ellison there, and this is probably because there were these other guys around, but Ellison like assaults him, right? Like he puts his hand on his neck, like it was very physical. Whereas like then when they were sitting at the table at dinner and Fergus gets pretty upset, and we'll get into this a bit later, Ellison doesn't get physical, but boy does he get angry, even though like at this point Fergus is kind of aggressing him. So I thought that was an interesting, I don't know, contrast.
Yeah, I think Fergus and Ellison are actually quite similar. Fergus describes like a scene where he smashes tiles, or he's like planning to, and he briefly thinks about doing that to Blaine, basically. So like he has the rage inside of him. Ellison is just the one that actually follows through.
Yeah.
It does make it obvious, more so with Ellison, I think, clearly to everyone, that he's able to commit violence. Fergus, only we really know about that at this moment. It places them in a similar field within this murder, I think.
For sure. That's a good point. So I mentioned this before too, that Fergus and Blaine have historically been besties, but Blaine these days seems to treat Fergus like a piece of crap. Like there's not really a lot of love there. He's really picking on him about the whole crush on Ellison thing, and kind of that's what incites some of his behavior at dinner, I think, too. But this friendship to me feels like it's long gone. It doesn't really feel salvageable. The one thing that they do connect on is like they had this situation in elementary school or middle school where like they tried to, or I think Fergus tried to play a prank on their nun teacher, and it backfired real hard on Blaine. So it felt like, man, are they just friends because trauma bond, or were they actually really friends for a while and it fell off?
Trauma bond is crazy. It seems, I mean, we do know Blaine is also into theater, so he's not like hot jock, super popular, at least in this moment. So I could see them becoming friends because they're both kind of out of place. And then as soon as you get to Marion and you start dealing drugs and you kind of become the life of the party, you suddenly don't need your theater gay best friend.
Right.
But I think it's Blaine more so almost outgrowing and not finding a use in Fergus anymore. And that might be how Blaine sees all of his relationships, as like useful, because obviously we know he cheats on his girlfriend.
Right. Definitely some using in that realm.
Yeah, he seems to love bomb the girls he's going after, and then they're not useful anymore. So then he moves on to somebody else. But Fergus might be in a similar situation. Honestly, when
that's sad.
Yeah, when the Kassidy-Fergus-Blaine relationship kind of gets brought up first, it seems as though there's tension between Kassidy and Fergus, because they're both vying for Blaine's attention. And it felt, for me at first, I thought maybe Fergus is in love with Blaine, which might be true.
Oh, I didn't even think about that option.
Yeah, so that might also be why there might be some awkwardness between their relationship. There could be more to that relationship that we're not really seeing yet, but in general, I just think Blaine is a horrible person, so.
Yes, absolutely.
We can all agree on that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'll be interested to see what else we learn from the flashbacks. I mean, that's true in general for all of the characters, but I'll be interested to see what more we learn about these two from that. I'll say too, in general, like I find some hesitance about flashbacks in books, and maybe because that's from bad experiences with other books, but I've really liked the flashbacks in this book.
Yeah, I agree. This book is framed very interestingly, I think. I think it's supposed to have those clue elements and feel like a murder mystery for us, for those in the book, right? And then I think the flashbacks for us kind of make it seem like an old movie. I don't want to say noir. It's not really noir, but it is kind of that disconnect between the murder that's happening and then we get the flashback.
Yeah.
And it kind of presents almost like an old movie. And we get to kind of see the obvious stuff and kind of play into the dramatic irony of it all, where we know what's going on, but they don't know what's going on. Almost soap opera-y, I guess.
Yeah.
So the flashbacks kind of, it plays into the not cliche, but like the campiness, I guess, of it.
Exactly. I think one thing that's interesting about the flashbacks in this versus other books, and especially with what you're saying about kind of our perspective as the reader versus theirs, is while I feel like the story starts clearer cut than it ends up at this point. Like, I feel like the flashbacks make things more complicated by introducing these other motives and sort of dynamics between the group, where even though we're like, 99.9% sure Izzy is responsible here, like wondering like what other aspects of these relationships could have informed what happened or might have something to do with what happened or could have been happening around what happened, right? Like it adds a lot more complexity and makes the story more interesting with time, as opposed to like, I don't know, clarifying or giving us more evidence points. Like we already have that part, so it makes things a lot more interesting.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it feels like a lot of small, almost plot twists happening with each flashback.
Yeah.
That I do think kind of give it that soap opera campy vibe, which is a good thing to include, I think, when you set up in the prologue and quite early on who the murderer was. Still presuming, but like for the most part, it feels quite clear who the murderer was.
Yeah, it's good. It's well done. Let's so since we've been talking about Izzy a little bit, we can transition into talking about her and this sort of interaction ship that she has with Marlowe, because I don't know what else to call it. We get some flashbacks of Marlowe kind of showing up at Izzy's job, or Isadora's job, in his words, at a bookstore, yeah, and sort of, I don't know, sort of creeping, in my opinion. That's how I saw it, kind of like hanging out and around, even though he probably shouldn't be, and not really talking to Izzy outside of like checking out and like trying to get that one interaction in. It's giving me weird vibes, even if it might actually just be normal. But I don't know. I find Marlowe to be a little bit off.
I think it's because he appears very cold and cool from the outside. But I think him accidentally mentioning he has a girlfriend and then being like, why the fuck did I do that? And him kind of not knowing how to approach Izzy, but walking by her every day at school and giving only her a nod. Like, there are things that are very sweet about what he's doing, but then he'll be like, and I know your secret, and I know you only eat saltines for lunch. And I'm like, that might be too much information. So it is
Yeah, I think
hard.
It really is like sitting on the line a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And I have an idea of why he might know these things, but it could very well kind of be that stalkery kind of you vibe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's hard to know. I want it to be sweet. I do like him, but I am worried. I do fear.
He's definitely giving, like, yeah, the elusive boy, right?
Yeah.
As far as potential love interest. And, like, that's fine, I guess. But I'm just feeling a little skeptical about him is all.
Yeah, I think some of his behaviors, if we, like, switched the perspective, if it was, like, a girl that was too nervous to approach a boy, so she like kind of hovered a little bit awkwardly and wasn't sure what to say, or change, like there's some things that I think would be fine, especially for like a high school kind of romance, especially I think when you're a character who's probably been given, well, okay, there's two aspects, right? Marlowe is rich, so he's probably been given a lot of what he has, and also he has no connections to anybody. So there's a lot of awkwardness he can have as a character. He's not close with his family. He doesn't really have any of these people as friends. He's out of place. So I think some of the things he's doing, I think, make sense for elusive boy. But the saltines was an odd thing to bring up, I will say.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, that we kind of get from the beginning that Izzy is interested in him, and then learn about all this, like, oh, actually he's interested in her, and there's like nothing there, nothing happening. But also I just don't understand why they are interested in each other with at least with the information we have, because it's kind of just like, I guess it's just like high school crushing, because that's all Kassidy really mentions about it. Marlowe doesn't really seem to talk about like what it is he is appreciating about being around Izzy. So I guess it's just that it's just giving a teenage, crush, but I can't really get behind it right now.
Well, he does gush about her a little bit in the interview. Like, he finds her quite admirable and, like, hardworking.
Yeah, that's true.
And a lot of these things. So he's obviously been... Like, Izzy stands out. She's not rich like Blaine and Kassidy. Like, she doesn't have a name, basically. But in Marion, she has a name, right? Her mom's a teacher. So she's going to stick out because she's not rich like everybody else. So it makes sense she has eyes on her. And she talks about this, too. Like, feeling like... More so that her mom is watching her always,
right.
But... everybody is going to be watching her in this scenario because she is out of place. So I think it makes sense for him to be watching her as well, and to find her interesting in the fact that she is not like everybody else that's in that school. She seems to be the most realistic kind of all of these characters, especially in regards to her motivations. Like, they make a lot of sense why she would kill somebody. As crazy as that sounds, but it's true. And then the opposite, I think Izzy's actually has less of a reason to like Marlowe. But I think it's also fine if she just likes him because he's kind of cool and reads books,
right.
Yeah,
right, yeah.
I want them to be sweet. I want them so bad to be sweet.
Oof. All right, well, we'll have to see how that goes.
I know.
So we can talk more, too, about Izzy's connection with Kassidy. We mentioned that they're besties, I assume, just since high school, because I don't think any of these folks and Izzy interacted before then.
Mm-hmm.
The primary issue here is that it seems Izzy and Blaine may be involved with each other. There's not like direct, here's a situation where, or like, here's a text message when. It's really like implied, and Blaine shows up at the house pretty comfortably, which Izzy's mom is not about. Things like that tell us, okay, it seems pretty likely without any confirmation that these two are hooking up. Maybe I feel like slightly less confident about this than I do about the murderer being Izzy, but it still seems like pretty darn certain that that's what's happening. It seems that Kassidy probably doesn't know about this, but that's up for debate, I think, as far as theories that we'll have later.
I will say, Izzy, I think it's when she's spying on Blaine and Chloe, or she like knows about that situation, she does mention she has letters from Blaine hidden in like her pillow or whatever. So I think there is quite a lot of proof that even if they didn't physically cheat, they might have emotionally cheated.
Yeah, it ends up introducing a complication with the Izzy Kassidy relationship. I mean, of course, but just because it seems like, I don't know, like you get this vibe that Izzy is kind of a I don't know, like a good character, I suppose. But then you find out that this is happening, and also she's kind of fronting to Kassidy, right? Like she's still treating her like her best friend, and like they're like sharing a bed in this mansion, like they're all this stuff. Not to mention that Izzy's like trying to murder him, like she has all of this stuff about being her best friend, but how could she say that? It just feels a little like we're crossing into psychotic, because how can she be cheating with her best friend's boyfriend, murdering him, and then being like, I need to protect her?
Yeah, I mean, Kassidy knows Blaine cheats on her. Like, she mentions when they get to the house, oh, Blaine is probably, talking to somebody else. Or, like, it seems like quite a comfortable fact that is something Blaine does. So, it is crazy that Izzy did it as well. I would be interested to know if maybe it was during a fighting period between the couple, or if there was, like, other circumstances, like they were at a party, or but the letters seem to showcase time happening.
Yeah.
So it is a sticky situation.
We also get this hint of issues from Chloe, a Chloe perspective, where she's kind of stalking to see what's going on between Blaine and Izzy, and sees them have a fight in front of the apartment where Izzy threatens to say something to Kassidy, which I assume is about this. I assume it's about the cheating, but that's not confirmed. And then Blaine threatens to say something else that we don't hear. So, and then that, like, Izzy's like, panicked about that. So this is like, I think, where we get one of the bigger nuggets of interest. Like we don't really know what Blaine is threatening there, and we already know that the cheating is a problem.
I think the author is very clever in how they wrote this because it is first person, it is from Izzy, and we know she murdered the person. We know with like 99% certainty she murdered Blaine. And we kind of know about the cheating, but there is so much motive we still don't know. We know it has to do with university, right? Because Izzy is so worried about the university she got like full scholarship for, Brown University, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's so worried about that being taken away from her and what that could mean for her family and like all of this stuff. So Blaine somehow has power over that situation. And it could just be as simple as Blaine using his influence and his money to make sure she's not accepted or smearing her name. Like it could be something so simple like that. Or it could be something else. Did Izzy cheat on exams? Did she do this?
Right. Yes.
Any of that stuff could be used, but it's stuff we don't know about yet. There's still so much to Izzy's character, even though she is the main character, that we don't know, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I'd be curious. The other thing I'll mention here, I have some guilty knowledge from my own college experience, but the only way that someone, as far as I know, in an Ivy League would lose their scholarship is if they lost their admission. So whatever it is has to be bad enough that they would rescind her admission, assuming that the author's working with that knowledge.
Yeah, I think that is what matters more to Izzy than the cheating bit, because she was going to tell
absolutely.
Kassidy. So I think that's the way we're kind of learning little bits about each of these characters in the flashbacks. This is like what we still need to figure out about Izzy, like the real reason why she would murder somebody.
Yeah. Well, we've got one more aspect to add to this crew of people, and that's the Chloe part, which we just alluded to with her doing some stalking. But there's kind of two parts to this. So one is that Chloe is also sneaking around with Blaine, which it seems to be known by Kassidy. There was a hookup on prom night, and it seems like there's been continuation since then, including all the way up into them being at the mansion together. There's also the aspect where Kassidy's dad and Chloe's mom are having a thing, which would be a affair on the part of Kassidy's dad, who I assume is still married to her mom. So there's layers here. there's a lot happening.
Yeah, Kassidy mentions early that she doesn't mention, but her parents start arguing, and she explains to Izzy that like they're arguing about work. It turns out work is Chloe's mom. We didn't know. But yeah, she absolutely hates Chloe. That is a known secret, I think, by everybody in this house, that Chloe and Blaine are together. They were planning, I think, to even hook up in the house, which is crazy to me. Absolutely unhinged behavior. But their fight is basically, at this point, it's quite obvious Blaine is not going to break up. Well, he's going to break up with Kassidy, but he is not doing it so that he can get with Izzy or Chloe, because he wants to explore new horizons in university. Is basically how that goes.
I love that he's at least finally acknowledged it, because he's doing that the whole time.
Yeah, so they fight about that. It turns out Chloe's mom was right. The man will not leave his wife for the other woman. He'll leave both of them and hook up with whoever he wants to, basically.
Yep. I kind of love her mom's character. I know she's involved with some cheating herself, but I loved her character in that chapter where we get her. Yeah.
All of their parents are such trash. Except Izzy's mom, I guess. She's pretty chill. But she's also, not rich and crazy. So it makes sense. Yeah, I would be interested to know more about Chloe's mom, because she sets it up so much like she's working late to help them. And so I wonder if she is, like, if she's in the unfortunate situation in which she is basically giving sexual favors right for some kind of benefit, and it's really Kassidy's dad that is the problem here. Mm-hmm. It would be interesting to know. I don't know if we could. Yeah, we'll see. Unless Chloe was planning. Okay, here's an idea. Chloe flashback where we figure out that's going on with Chloe's mom, and so Chloe comes to the house and is planning to kill Kassidy. Oh, shit. And that's what the red vial is. Because that solves the Blaine problem, too. You don't have to break up with Kassidy if she's dead, and then also we can get together.
Honestly, Great find. I think that's
Oh my
that's
God.
a great theory.
Oh no, suddenly a murder. We're gonna get another murder, aren't we?
You know what? I really think we are. I know it's called Suddenly a Murder, but I kind of, the vibe is giving, like, there's still so much tension, right? And the police, for some reason, have decided it's smart to leave all of the suspects in a house together. So
Right, with like no supervision, basically.
Yes. So I think it's pretty likely we're going to see another murder, at least one.
Okay, that's a new theory.
Well, I actually do have a theory about someone getting murdered, but this is a different one.
You do.
Yeah. We'll get there, though.
The last bit, I guess, also happens with the awkward dinner where Kassidy mentions the Chloe stuff. It is the Ellison and Blaine relationship, which is still kind of a mystery at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We know they're spending some time together based on Fergus's flashbacks. They seem quite close. Ellison was like failing a class, which we know kind of Fergus helped him pass by tutoring him, which is when the fling happened. But the teacher for that class did die under a heart attack, but mysterious circumstances nonetheless.
Mysterious heart attack.
And there was a rumor apparently that Ellison is the one that did it, and Fergus kind of brings all that up, and it turns out Blaine was the one spreading that rumor, because why not? That's fun, I guess. He had to be interviewed by the police, but thankfully it's not on any record because his mother is an attorney, and she kind of dealt with that. Of course, she uses that to kind of lord over him, but that's fine, I guess.
I thought that whole thing was interesting because the conversation with his mother, that is, because it kind of doesn't clear him. Like, at first, you're kind of like, yeah, they're totally like, that was totally a bad rumor. Like, it's really not, it's like you've got all those extra layers because Ellison is black. But then his mom is kind of drops it in that conversation like it might have happened. The fact that he was getting tutored by Fergus is, like, it's a good reason for that to not have been the case, right? Like, I mean, unless they were just spending too much time in the bed and not enough, in the books. But otherwise, like, it seems like, okay, like, Fergus could presumably tutor Ellison to success, or just, like, it could just be that this was a by chance thing, and, like, he really did get the pass from that teacher that likes athletes. But there's lots of reasons for it to not have been a murder, but that conversation just made me a little suspicious again.
Yeah, I think the rumor in itself is reason enough for Ellison to want to kill Blaine. Also, the fact that this is revealed before Blaine gets murdered, interesting timing.
But also the fact that it comes out, like, it almost makes it less likely that they'll pin Ellison, because they're going to be like, man, that would be really obvious. Like, we already knew that Blaine did it. Like, that can't come out anymore. I don't know. It feels like maybe it's on his side that they had that conversation at dinner.
Yeah, the only issue is we know it's a mysterious death regardless. There's still the possibility it was a murder. So even though he was cleared by the police, that doesn't mean he was cleared.
Yeah, right.
Also, him knowingly, like, he is violent. Fergus can attest to that. Very well, he might. And just point blank, he's also black. So there's not a lot working for him in this scenario in regards to being pinned with what happened here. It was also a very violent death. Like, he was stabbed multiple times.
Mm-hmm. Thought they really set up such a dangerous conversation here, honestly.
Yeah.
Well, after all is said and done at dinner, the murder happens later that evening.
It is kind of crazy that Izzy sneaks into the shower, stabs him multiple times, and doesn't get blood on herself.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great point. I was going to say the thing that I think is important in this is definitely that she is somewhat caught leaving his room by Marlowe, right? Like, that's definitely going to come into play later.
Yeah, Marlowe's like in love with her, so it doesn't matter
which it makes me wonder about motivation too. But anyway, so that happens. She gets a little bit caught on the way out, though not with specifics. Though Marlowe also seems to know what happened for some reason, right? I guess he seems to know a lot more than he should know about Izzy. He's kind of like, what's done is done about it.
Yeah, it is strange because even in previous conversations, he's like insinuating that he knows she's going to murder him as well. Like, oh, are you actually going to do it?
Yeah, like, it's weird. And then he also makes the call.
He does make the call.
I wonder if that was to try to cover her a little bit because he can control what's said.
He does say a lot of things that unintentionally cover her. Like, in the interview as well, they both mention the pipes being loud.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Yeah. What a great little corroboration. Yeah.
Yeah. Which there's no way he would know to do that intentionally.
Right.
Unless he also knows about the secret passages. Which is a possibility because him and Kassidy have been to this house before this trip.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yeah. They like viewed it first.
I bet you that's the case, honestly, now that you say it. It could also just be that he knew that that was her bathtub and was like, oh, look, I can give this to her as an alibi.
That's true, too. Crazy he knows specifically which pipes are her bathtub.
I believe it right now, so.
Yeah, it depends. Like, is it the sweet route or the stalker route? Could go either way.
Oof. Well, some detectives show up. Well, police show up first, and then the detectives show up. We get Kate's, who is the actual, like, you know, local government-provided detective, and then Pilar de Leon, who is, I guess, she's like a PI, right?
A consulting detective is what she says. Which this also fits the very, like, I mean, it's very Sherlock Holmes. Like, we have the depressed detective and then the consulting detective that's a little eccentric. So it's, like, kind of, again, being a little campy.
Yeah, I kind of love that. And I do think it's no accident that she's Latina.
Oh, for sure. She even notes that her accent sounds similar to her dad's.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if her working on this case has something to do with that.
I think it has to, right? Like, I think it has to 100%. How she gets enough information gathered to make that decision in time is another thing, but I wonder why that's enough to catch her attention, because unless this is a thing, and you know, this book is written by a Latina too, right? Like, unless there's like a thing here of Pilar de Leon knows that it was Izzy and wants to like help her out, I don't know why that would like bring her in as like, I want to catch this person, you know? Like, what does the overlap part have to do? Like, I guess I'm having trouble seeing outside of the in-group benefit, right? Like, what is the reason she would target a young Latina knowing that she's probably the one who did it?
Right, because she says things like, oh, isn't it interesting you're in a murder mystery and you happen to love murder mysteries?
Right.
And it's like, that's kind of awkward. and Pilar does very intentionally join this case. And even Kate says, like, this is so clear cut. Like, why are you here?
Yeah.
There is something else going on, even in that scenario, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, I guess I just can't imagine her being there unless her intention is to complicate the scenario, not solve it. But she does seem like she wants to solve it at the same time, or at least she's saying she knows the solution. So it seems like she's positioned as villain, like she's gonna try to get it out of Izzy, right? Try to get her to say something incriminating. But yeah, like I said, I just don't see that as being a good reason for her to show up. Unless we find out that she's also murdered someone and got away with it.
That would be crazy. Yeah, I mean, there's a few scenarios I can see her being pulled into this case that I think have to do with our main theory about what might be happening. But if it is just Izzy killed somebody, that's that, then it is strange that she's there. I would assume she knows her dad somehow.
I kind of think the dots are a lot more connected than we can tell, right? Like, I think that's just how these types of mystery books work in general. But I think it might be down to that level, right? Like, I think there's going to be a lot of just a lot of things that we have no way of guessing right now. Which in other books I've had problems with that idea, but right now I don't have a problem with that idea because I think we're going to get there naturally. Well, we get a series of interviews over. Well, first, I guess, before we get to the overhearing, Izzy and Kassidy are pulled into the first interview. It's really Kassidy's interview, but Izzy comes along, and that's how we get the first tidbit.
Yeah, Cass had a breakdown, understandably, and had to be sedated. So she's kind of been asleep since the murder happened until this new day, which is a long time.
Yeah, it also feels illegal. I don't know if it is, but it felt illegal to put her out that hard.
Because even Izzy is like, they must have given her too much. Like, this is a long time to be sedated.
And just, like, unsafe, given that they've left all these kids in the house.
For sure. And so I'm thinking that maybe, a small theory, I don't think it's possible within the timeline, but being sedated is a pretty good alibi. If there's a moment in which Kassidy could have woken up and done something, and then presumably went back to sleep, there's something that could be done there. It would make sense if that happened. I wouldn't be upset about it because
like as far as tampering, you mean, or?
Yes, yeah. But the timeline in which the police investigated and then left, and then Izzy sat in the room waiting for like night so she could search for the knife. I don't think timeline-wise it works out, but maybe there's like a gap of time in which Kassidy could have done something. I don't know. But other than that, Kassidy has nothing really to say, I think, in the interview. She's upset, obviously. She was dating Blaine. She kind of just lays all of that stuff out. She's still kind of off because of the drugs, so it makes sense.
They do immediately transition into interviewing Izzy, though. And I think there's probably worse ways that this could have gone, but there's definitely better ways that this could have gone for Izzy. She's, constantly thinking about, does she need to lie about this thing? Or does she need to lie about another thing? She, even says pretty directly, like, wow, I understand why people screw this up, because it's really hard to, like, decide what to lie about and then keep those consistent. I mean, one of her own inconsistencies that I noticed was her mentioning, like, I wouldn't have been able to hear anything over the pipes, but I would have heard Kassidy coming in the room. And, like, there's maybe some space for that if, like, presumably the pipes aren't running if Kassidy comes in the room. But I was like, this is way too close together of a contradiction to not bring up as a potential concern point.
And I feel like Pilar, who's described as kind of like a bird of prey, picking apart those inconsistencies. I wouldn't be surprised if this got brought up.
Exactly. There's other things too, like she asks if they're talking about potential motives, and they say, it's usually pretty mundane, things like drugs. And she's like, what about revenge? It's like, cool, let's like just show the hand directly. And then, like we mentioned, she mentions loving murder mysteries in the 1920s. It's like, I don't really know why you would mention that in this situation, but yeah, I felt like Izzy was very easy to target in this situation. And I think it would be hard for her to keep a whole lot of information from Pilar.
At the moment, she has like the least motivation from everybody, but also that is dependent on if Chloe reveals, right, that she and Blaine were having an affair as well. Yeah, I think the revenge thing is like the worst thing she could have possibly done.
Absolutely. But just don't, like, when it comes to this situation, don't answer questions you haven't asked, right? Like, don't put more into the conversation than there was to start with. Ellison's got the best head on it, on himself about this situation.
Yeah, well, it makes sense with his mother being a lawyer. He was very much like, do you have a warrant for that? Do you have a warrant for this? Mm-hmm. Like, which is, what you should do.
Yeah, honestly, go off. I was like pro Ellison for all that. Like, yeah, you tell him like that, because even one of the cops, I think Kate's mentions directly, like, oh, I heard one of you's well informed, and like, it basically is like it said something along the lines of like, if they don't have information, we can use it against them, right? Like, if they don't know that they have these rights, then we can use it against them. And I'm like, I don't really think that's how that's supposed to go,
I mean, it is though. Like, if you don't go through the rights and like actually understand what's happening, then anything they say can be used against you.
Yeah, it's shitty.
Like, very clearly.
Because they're like clearly holding it back, right? They're clearly like, we're not going to tell them what those rights are, Only the rights we're required to tell them if we arrest them,
Also, that is a good point. Like, are any of these kids being read rights before these interviews?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I assume they would need to hear something before they start answering questions, right?
Yeah, because, I mean, I guess if they're not suspects, like, very clearly, I think if they're just being interviewed, this is us showing our hand at how little we understand.
We need Ellison for this, yeah.
I think if they're just being interviewed by police as, like, witnesses, I don't think you need to have your rights read. I think as soon as you're declared a suspect, I think that's when they're supposed to read you your rights.
I think they're all suspects, though, at this point, because they even say it's probably one of you, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if they've been declared in, like, in an official capacity as a suspect.
But that's convenient, right?
I think that's the point.
Yeah.
I think they can, like, withhold that as long as possible so they don't have to do the rights. Like, so these kids will not call a lawyer, that kind of stuff.
Ugh, annoying.
I mean, I could be wrong about everything I just said, but I think
But they just come off as shady about it anyway, so.
Yeah, they're going to twist things up however works for them.
Yeah.
I think that's what they're doing with these interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Because any of these kids could say, I'm not going to answer any questions. I would like to call a lawyer. And you would have to call a lawyer. The fact that nobody here is doing that is a little strange.
Yeah, it's a little strange because they are mostly rich kids. I would bet that's like a thing these rich kids know about.
I also don't think they can be kept on this house.
Yeah, that didn't seem right.
Yeah, they're basically locked there.
Yeah, I think that's a convenience for the book.
Yeah, which is like fair enough.
Yeah. So we hear from Fergus next, and this is where Izzy transitions to, oh yeah, I can hear all this stuff if I go into the secret passageway, and disappears presumably for a long time, which I have questions about too. They ask Fergus about whether or not Blaine is stealing drugs. Fergus lies and says no, and then they break him on it by being like, oh, but like we really need to know in case someone from the outside murder him for drugs. So we kind of find that this is like a big motivator for Fergus. It's unclear whether it's because he doesn't want to believe that one of them did it or because he wants suspicion drifted away from their group.
I can understand the latter because even if he's not necessarily close with these people, it's scary to think that somebody within your group has just killed somebody.
Yeah.
So I could understand wanting to blame something else, right? Somebody else. I think that's just a natural response.
I agree. I just wonder if there is a thing of like he's putting it out there. He knows someone in the group has done it, but he wants to cover their ass by saying, oh, I think someone on the outside came in and did it.
Oh. I don't know about that. I don't know if he cares enough about any of them.
Yeah, that's fair. Because he kind of hates them all. All right. No, that's a good point. Other things he lets on is that Blaine was going to break up with Kassidy at the end of the week. Does he mention Chloe directly?
Yeah, Fergus does mention knowing, or like there was an affair going on and then he brings up Chloe's name. That does put Kassidy and Chloe in a bit of a sticky situation.
I'm sure they'll be following up with Kassidy throughout, so.
Yeah, I don't think Fergus did it intentionally to pass blame. I think he's just being exceedingly honest because he's afraid of the situation.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, and I think they mention it in the book even, like he's got probably the greatest room for guilt because he's like not on good terms with him in their last conversation.
I mean, other than Kassidy and Chloe, he kind of did stir the pot during that dinner.
Yeah, I mean, Kassidy definitely stirred it. But yeah, Fergus really dug the knife in. Or the figurative one, that is.
Yeah, he was kind of fighting with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So we skipped him by accident. We just remembered things wrong. But Marlowe has his interview after Izzy and before Fergus. But for the most part, he's like the most calm in this interview, I find.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about Isadora a bit, but obviously doesn't mention her coming out of Blaine's room before the body was discovered. And I think we brought this up before too. Also mentions the pipes being loud, which helps her story a bit.
Mm-hmm.
He also very clearly brings up Blaine dealing drugs, but won't go into detail of how he knows that, which could speak badly of his character, but I think it is because we learn his brother OD'd, which he tells Izzy about. But I would assume the reason Marlowe hates Blaine and wants him dead is because his brother probably OD'd on the drugs that Blaine sold him or gave to him. That's the storyline I'm thinking is happening here.
That's a good connection. I didn't really connect those dots, but especially because Blaine makes a comment at some point in time where he's like, oh, he probably got those drugs from some like shady dealer downtown.
Yeah. He does pass off the blame and he says, oh, I was somewhere else. I wasn't even there when it happened.
So he's already actively covering ass.
Yeah.
And I think that's it for the interviews, right?
Yeah, we stopped before we got anything with Chloe or Ellison, but obviously we know why they would want to kill Blaine. Chloe knows Blaine was cheating on Kassidy, both with her and with Izzy, and that could piss anybody off, I suppose. And they did have a fight as well at the manor, so she could throw a wrench into things, though, if she does bring up the Izzy-Blaine situation, which I assume she will. I don't know why she would keep that to herself.
I mean, it was, I guess, kind of Marlowe to keep his mouth on the shut side for Izzy, but I just don't think that's going to stick.
Chloe, she doesn't fit in this group very much anyway.
She's the only one who really has something to say about Izzy, right? So
Yeah, because Kassidy, if she knows, wouldn't bring it up.
I do kind of think Kassidy knows, too.
I think Kassidy knows. And Fergus could maybe figure it out, but I don't know. He might say it like similar to the dinner situation where it kind of bursts out and he's upset about it and he kind of just lets it all out. I could see that happening. But interview-wise, I think Chloe will very clearly say Izzy and Blaine were having an affair.
Right.
So, and then Ellison we also don't have an interview for, but we know about the rumor situation, and actually it would be interesting if Ellison doesn't have an interview at all. He's the only one that seems to know his rights here.
He might just say no, yeah. I don't know, he might not want to do that if everyone else interviewed, though.
That's true, yeah.
I might see it as a bad move.
Yeah, prove his innocence in that case, which is something, don't do that. Do not. Just refuse to speak.
Yeah. because they need evidence, not lack of it.
Yeah. But there is also that interesting bit of Ellison by Blaine's body putting something in his pocket. We get a hint of that. And we don't know what that object was.
I almost missed this, honestly.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's the burner phone that Blaine has, because he still does keep a cell phone on him
point.
at the house.
Yeah.
I'm doubting he has the knife because Izzy put it in a pair of pants in the armoire, so it wouldn't be by Blaine's body anyway. Though don't know where the knife went.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because that also falls a part of it. So I guess we've talked about all the interviews, all of our people. We can close things out with some other theories that maybe didn't fit into the other things we've discussed.
So there is the knife issue. It is missing. Izzy goes to look for it. She can't find it. Marlowe also searches Blaine's room. Well, he takes pictures, I think. And then he looks for something, and he can't seem to find it either. So they both have something going on.
And it's weird. I wonder what Marlowe would even care to look for. I don't think there's any personal motivation for him, right? It's like more to do with Izzy.
Right. So unless he also went to look for the knife, maybe? Or if he, like you mentioned, if Blaine was poisoned before he was then stabbed, maybe Marlowe technically killed Blaine first.
Right.
And he was retrieving something for that.
I don't know. That one's definitely tougher.
Or maybe he wasn't. This wouldn't really work because the police already investigated the room. But if he wasn't looking for something, but if he was placing something.
Yeah, that's a good point. If he's trying to help cover up.
Yeah.
I guess it's somewhat related to I guess tampering isn't the right word, but with things that happened around the crime scene or the murder situation, there's a whole interaction about the key to, I think it's just their bedroom, which is expected. Kassidy expects to be in the door, but when Izzy steps out and comes back in, she's taken the key with her, and it goes all the way to the bathroom with her. I feel like this is definitely a loose end that's going to come back to get her at some point. I think it's probably going to innocently come out, and then it's going to become a point of question or concern for the detectives.
Also, I just actually looked at the book. First of all, on the front of the book, it says one of us in the manor with the knife. Okay, this is clue.
Yeah.
But also on the back of the book, there's a picture of a key.
Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, the key coming back up again. I mean, it contradicts the major theory that might happen in this book.
Yeah. Because, the only person who would really say anything about it is Kassidy.
But yes, okay, the major theory, which I started to think of quite soon, but I don't know, is Kassidy says something interesting very quickly in the book. When they get to the manor, basically she tells Izzy, everything I did for the two of us. And then later Pilar has a line 5 of you are innocent, and I think 5 of you are innocent might be a red herring a little bit. Because I'm wondering if Kassidy planned this murder. And by plan this murder, I mean she obviously didn't do the murder, but did she recruit Marlowe to help and then also accumulate all of these people who would want Blaine dead, trapped into a house with no cell phones and no means of leaving, basically, so that if Izzy did murder Blaine, somebody else could take the blame for it.
Or at least things would be blurry.
At least things would be blurry, yeah.
Oh, I think that's a great point. I didn't even think of it specifically from that angle, but I had this similar idea of Kassidy is pulling the strings, right? That the people who are involved with this don't understand what's happening. She's masterminding, right? She's doing things that they don't realize to put people in the right position for things to happen. I kind of thought it from a slightly different angle too. I thought this book might be going for a bit of an Orient Express vibe where everyone is a bit involved, but with the difference being that no one is working together. I thought, okay, maybe this is why I brought up the idea of maybe someone trying to poison Blaine at some point. Maybe everyone came in with an intention to do something to Blaine or have something happen, and Kassidy kind of did her own sort of espionage amongst the friends and brought them all together in this situation, so that way at least one of them would happen. At least Blaine would not make it out of there alive or something, and that they would all have had their intentions or their part in it without realizing how their parts fit together.
Right. I think there's just something about Kassidy planning all of this for Izzy. And I do think she knows about the affair, all of them. So it's does she set Izzy up in this moment? It's possible. it would be a much darker end to this book, I think, if that's what happens.
No, I think it's the only way this book ends with these two staying friends, because then they'd both have to be just as crazy as each other.
Oh, I meant like if Izzy takes the fall for this murder.
Oh, okay.
It's because Kassidy wanted her to take the fall.
I see.
Like as a revenge plot. But yeah, and your point too, like the other way in which Kassidy orchestrated all of this so Izzy could kill somebody is also quite dark. I think that's more dark in like a fun way, as strange as that sounds.
Yeah, I agree with you though. Where like the ending is that they are both like a little crazy and did this without knowing each other was involved.
Which I think would fit with how the book feels right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody's kind of out of touch and we are talking about the murder of somebody, but like, who got murdered here, right? The rich, cheating, drug dealing guy? Like, is it that big of a deal? I don't know. So Kassidy might, interestingly enough, I mean, she hates Chloe's ass, I think, for multiple reasons, but instead of hating the other woman, she is working with the other woman to kill the cheating boyfriend in this situation.
That's interesting.
At first I was like, is it too obvious? Like, would it be boring if it was too obvious? But honestly, I don't think so. Even if that is exactly what happened, I would still be excited to read that.
Me too, yeah. I do think the author has done a good job of keeping things questionable and interesting. You know, like, I think this is a really fun theory, and I could see it being the case. It doesn't feel like it's too out of whack or anything, but I could also just see it not going this way at all, too. So the author's done a good job of putting us in a theorizing position.
Yeah, for sure. I think the benefit of having the murder known and then playing with how everything else is kind of entangled and working together means even if the Kassidy theory plays out exactly as we've described, getting to that point is the exciting part.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I think is quite a difficult thing to achieve.
I agree. I was going to say the same thing. It sounds difficult, but makes for a good book.
Yeah. But the one thing, I think I brought this up during the Pilar bit. I like hinted at it. But the reason her being there might also be because Kassidy pulled that string as well.
That's a good point. I like that. Because then it explains the interest, which feels like the missing part, even though she talks about it, but it does feel like the missing part.
Yeah. It doesn't feel right for it to be a coincidence in a book like this. Everything feels very intentional.
Yeah.
So I could see that happening, just to fully wrap up that theory.
Honestly, I think that makes sense too, because it kind of explains why the author even bothered to have Kate ask the question of why were you interested in this case?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let me throw in this other theory. So I mentioned earlier, I do think someone else is going to get murdered in this book. I'm starting to feel like two someone's going to get murdered in the remainder of the book, but I'm going to stick with this one because I think it has to be some of the more, I hate to call them side characters because it doesn't really feel like that, but yeah, some of the less main characters in the book. I think the best shot is that Fergus is going to at least try to murder Ellison because a couple of reasons. I mean, due to the same sort of squabble they've been having, but I think Fergus is feeling a bit more emotional these days, and he was already feeling more enabled at that dinner table. So I kind of see, as things maybe get a little bit crazier and more tense, that sort of violent aspect that we saw Fergus coming out with at least an attempted murder, though I would like to predict that it's going to work, but we've seen Ellison is got some power over Fergus. So, but that's my theory. My theory is Fergus is gonna murder Ellison.
I didn't think about it, but it would make sense.
I think too, like there's for this to happen, it probably would have to get entangled with the current murder a bit. So maybe he's gonna find a way to blame Ellison, or at least blame Ellison for something related to Blaine, and then that will cause a little bit more of a catalyst.
That would be interesting. Yeah, if they had some kind of fight, whether the murder works out or not, and then him saying, I was trying to defend myself, he was going to murder me, like, trying to flip it a bit, that might be interesting.
That could be interesting, too, yeah. Oh, yeah, actually, I like that as an added thing on there.
Yeah, it makes everybody feel so untrustworthy. Because Fergus is now lying about Ellison trying to murder him and pinning the blame on him, but then obviously Fergus was the one that tried to murder Ellison, so now Ellison is going to be saying, well, it was actually Fergus. He must have killed Blaine as well, and all the blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
It complicates everything.
That would be really interesting. There's a few ways that could go that would be interesting. Like if Fergus does try to murder Ellison and Ellison kills Fergus instead and is actually trying to defend himself.
Right.
You know, that could get super complicated super quick. So.
Yeah. And we still don't know what's in that little red vial.
Yeah, oh, I forgot. I didn't even make a theory about that. I mean, it just felt like poison when we saw it at first. That's kind of what like planted the seed.
Yeah, it's unmarked. It's obviously not perfume. Izzy seems to care about it a lot, so I'm assuming it's going to matter.
One more thing we should discuss is whether or not we actually think someone's going to be arrested by the end of this book. Like, is the point of this book going to be like someone gets caught, or is this going to be the sort of book that goes in a really messy direction towards the end? We don't really find someone gets arrested, or if someone gets arrested, it happens after the end of the book. Like, I don't know, what are the vibes on the end of the book?
I mean, it had a prologue. I could see it having a kind of an epilogue. I think if multiple people die, it kind of complicates the situation, but it also might make it easier to blame one person for everything, which is what I could see happening in this scenario.
Right.
I think it'd be kind of shitty if Izzy ends up getting arrested.
Me too. I would probably dislike this book if that's how it ends.
In my head, it feels like if somebody gets arrested, it's going to be a scapegoat situation. And so it's not going to be one of the main characters.
I suppose. I guess I just see that as unlikely to happen, which makes me think that no one's going to get arrested in this book.
Yeah, I also think that's the most likely. I also think because having somebody definitively arrested, like it makes everything feel more serious suddenly.
Yeah, I agree.
Which I think kind of messes with the vibe of the book.
I just don't want our, even though it's kind of wild that she murdered someone, I don't really want her to lose her life to it too, you know?
Yeah. Especially because I feel like intention matters a lot, especially in this book. The reasons Izzy is murdering somebody, and I guess I should say, you shouldn't murder people.
Right. That's what I'm contending with. Go ahead.
Right. But in this fictional sense, intention, I think, matters. Right. It's the difference between a villain and like an anti-hero, I suppose,
yeah.
right? There is nuance there to be had. And Izzy, it's not just about the cheating. It's about taking care of her family. So, intention-wise, I would not say Izzy is a villain in this story,
exactly.
even though she has done something a bit villainous, perhaps.
I agree.
So yeah, her getting arrested, I think, would be a bummer.
Exactly. Yeah, it's funny how this sort of book puts you in that position where it's like the protagonist is the murderer, and they are still the protagonist.
Yeah.
Weird grounds.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about moral dilemmas, but honestly, I'm happy to ride the wave, baby.
It's a book. It's not a real murder.
Yeah.
This book was great for theories, though, already. For
sure, yeah. There is a theory about everything.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I'm excited to learn what does and doesn't happen.
If you have your own thoughts and theories, it's 5050_books. Everything else in the description. And we're gonna finish this book next time. And that's that.
Alrighty. Bye-bye.